Hello, welcome to this live panel on the theme of Beyond the Pandemic, the role of social work ethics and values in co-building a new eco-social world. I'm Sarah Banks and I'm coordinating this session with other members of the Social Work Ethics Research Group and guests from different International Federation of Social Workers regions across the world. Before we make a start, and I'll tell you what we're going to do, I would first like to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. So I'll ask you to introduce yourself, please put on your mic and very briefly say who you are and where you're from. So I'll start with Teresa. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. I am Teresa Bertotti. I come from Italy, the University of Trento. I'm a social worker and academic teacher.
Thank you. Lynn, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Lynn. I'm a social worker and I'm studying a PhD at Durham, and I've joined this group to join some of the research.
Thank you. Jane Shears.
Hello everyone, my name is Jane Shears. I work at the British Association of Social Workers and I'm also the International Federation of Social Workers Global Ethics Commission. Welcome along.
Thank you. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah. I am Michelle Shum, assistant professor at the Hong Kong Baptist University in the Department of Social Work. I am also a social worker.
Thank you. Kim.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Strom. I'm from the United States. I'm on the faculty of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I am the commissioner for North America on the IFSW Ethics Commission.
Thank you, Kim. Maria Jesus.
Hello, my name is Maria Jesus Uriz, and I am teacher at the Public University of Navarra in the north of Spain.
Thank you. Hassan.
Hello, my name is Hassan, President of Iran Association of Social Workers and Ethics Commissioner of IFSW.
Thank you. And I know in the background we also have Abbas, who may do some translation work. Welcome, Abbas.
Hello, thank you. And it's proud of me to be with you here.
Thank you. And finally, Hadi. Oh, if you could unmute, please, Hadi.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. I'm Hadi Rida Ashkanani, and I'm a professor of social work at Kuwait University.
Thank you very much indeed. So we have a very interesting team with us today. We're going to be talking about some research that's been done by the Social Work Ethics Research Group in partnership with the International Federation of Social Workers, particularly their ethics commissioners. We prepared a plenary video. I know some of you may have watched it, some of you may not, but we're not going to repeat what we said in the video. So if you want some more detail, please do refer to the pre-recorded video. We've been doing this research, firstly on ethical challenges during the pandemic based on a survey in 2020, but we've continued. And this year, from March to May, we organised a series of webinars in partnership with the ethics commissioners in the International Federation of Social Workers regions. And Hassan, Hadi and Abbas were involved very kindly in facilitating webinars that were in Farsi and in the Arab-speaking world. So that was very, very useful for us. And I'd like to thank you for doing that. And that's why we've invited them here today to put that perspective on our discussions. The reason we wanted to do the webinars is that we wanted to discuss with social workers what they felt they'd learned from the pandemic in relation to social work ethics and values. We know it's been very challenging, and those of you who've been attending the summit over the last 2 days will have heard quite a lot of stories, not only from social workers, but other healthcare and professional workers who experienced a lot of challenges about what is right, what is wrong. We're wanting to look now to see what have we learned. We had to do things differently during the pandemic. What have we learned about what we value going forward to the future? We've experienced one crisis, which was a health crisis globally, but we are also currently experiencing a climate and ecological crisis. In many parts of the world, they have experienced and are still experiencing wars, other disease epidemics, disasters. So what have we learned from the pandemic about our ethics and values, not just for social work, but actually for ourselves as citizens and for other professionals, taking us forward to co-build the new eco-social world? So that's the theme for today. And what I'm going to do shortly is just show you 2 slides, and each member of our group will very briefly introduce one of the themes that arose from the webinars, just saying a few sentences about it and ending with a question. We will then review these questions, and I'll ask our guests firstly on Zoom to contribute their reflections and thoughts, and then we'll open it up to those of you who are joining us on YouTube. And Jane Shears is going to be monitoring the YouTube chat, so please do put any reflections, comments or questions as we go along into the YouTube, and we hope for it to be quite an interactive session in dialogue with you, and obviously getting into dialogue amongst ourselves. So that's our plan for today. So I shall now share my screen and we can get started. Okay. So these are the themes that we found from the webinars, and we've gone into greater detail in the pre-recorded video. So we'll just recap for those of you who've seen it already and introduce it to you for those who haven't. Obviously, social workers were very keen to talk about the ethical challenges they had experienced during the pandemic, and we asked them to tell us what had caused them to rethink ethics in their practice. We've just pulled out 2 key themes for now, and Kim is going to introduce the first one, which is about self-care.
Thank you, Sarah. As many of you will probably appreciate, that during the pandemic, social workers and other essential helpers often had to choose between their own safety, the expectations of their employers, and the needs of their clients. And it pointed out in a very bright light an old problem, an old issue about the ethics of self-care. How do social workers decide where to draw the line between their dedication to service and dangerous or exploitive working conditions? So really, one of the predominant and lingering questions for me is, when social workers and other professionals behave heroically under impossible circumstances, such as during the pandemic, are they undermining the fight for resources and fairness?
Thank you very much, Kim. We'll now move on to look at digital working, which was a very common issue for people during the pandemic. And I'll ask Maria Jesus to introduce us to that theme.
Thank you very much, Sarah. During the pandemic, digital communication made it possible to connect service users with social workers, and it also created a global community between social workers. Participants in our webinars saw it as an important tool to replace in-person visits and meetings. But on the other hand, some users didn't have access to internet or cell phones. The difficulties were still more evident in cases of child protection and domestic violence, and it also raised issues about privacy and the quality of services. So for that reason, there are both, I think, opportunities, but also dangers in developing digital working in the post-pandemic area. So one important question for the audience will be, what ethical values should guide the use of digital technology in co-building a new eco-social world?
Thank you very much, Maria Jesus. The third theme is about the importance of a holistic approach. This has been a key theme of the summit so far, and not surprisingly, it came up during our webinars. And I'm going to ask Michelle to talk about the theme of people and planet.
Thank you, Sarah. In the webinars, some social workers felt that the experience of surviving the pandemic, along with growing awareness of the impacts of climate change, pressed them to consider the need for a holistic approach in practice, viewing humans as whole beings and also parts of the ecosystem. By recognizing the interconnection of all elements in a society, this also calls for a change in our systems, having to advocating multidisciplinary collaboration and sustainable development, considering human psychosocial well-being and connection in the community. We should think globally and act locally. So, inspiring from this sharing, I just think, how far does the current social work education actually nurture such a holistic approach in practice? And also, can Ubuntu or similar values or philosophies can guide holistic social work practices?
Thank you very much. And I'll now move on to ask Lynn to talk about working with communities.
Thanks, Sarah. So a really important powerful message that came in the webinars was the importance of working holistically within communities. But there was also some discussion around people often who were the most vulnerable in the pandemic, who were already marginalised within their communities. And we had examples of people without residency rights, Indigenous people, minoritised ethnic groups, homeless people, and adolescents who were experiencing distress, to share a few examples. So I think the question that this raises is, what is the community that we speak about, and how should social workers and other professionals prioritise work within communities beyond the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Lynn. And I'll now move on to Jane to talk about the role of social workers as skilled experts.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who is busily sending us chat on YouTube. So in this area, participants in the webinars talked about the status of social workers in their countries and of finding a voice during the pandemic, of standing together to promote and protect people's rights in new and different ways. And we heard examples of social workers working as agents for change in campaigning for environmental and sustainable development, and drawing on the concept of global citizenship in all our responsibilities to contribute to an eco-social world. And the question that has been formulated from this area from the webinars is, what is the potential role that social workers can play in co-building a new eco-social world in partnership with people they work with?
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. And the final point is about extending the concept of justice from social justice also to include cultural, contributory and ecological justice. We're not going to go into the definitions of those now. You can find those on the video. But what we noticed was in the webinars, some social workers discussed the interconnections between people and their environments as climate change and loss of species impact on people's lives and livelihoods. But most people express concern from the point of view of the impact on already marginalised people. So the question here is, should social workers extend their value commitments from human rights and social justice to include ecological justice, entailing that non-human entities such as animals or oceans also have rights? And that's also been a core theme coming out through the summit, but I think for social workers this could be particularly challenging and interesting to think about. What I'm going to do now...
Sarah, sorry, this is Kim. We skipped bureaucracy, so
I am so sorry.
And also for our technical assistance, we've had requests for closed captioning. So to two little process points.
Thank you very much indeed, Kim. So Mayaka, I wonder if you could put the closed captioning on, please, and apologies to the audience for the fact that that hasn't been on, and humble apologies to Teresa for missing out the bureaucracy theme. Maybe that was deliberate because we don't like bureaucracy. Over to you, Teresa, please.
Okay, never mind. Don't worry. It's okay. Thank you, Sarah. Well, just a few words about a very discussed topic in the webinars. One of the main themes was the relationship with bureaucracy and the system of regulations. Because during the pandemic, social workers find themselves navigating between two different aspects. One, in a very strict bureaucracy and rules that often hinder their interventions, bounded the possibility of action, but the other ones, a complete lack of regulation because of the new circumstances. And they play a central role in finding the right solution, creative solution, when these solutions were not foreseen by the system. And so they extended, in many situations, they extended a lot their discretion that could, but also this could lead to some, the possibility to provide service to only one people and not to the other, to a sort of a risk of inequity. The pandemic also has caused all of us rethinking to our relation to the system and to think about our trust to the system and to the welfare organization. And often we replace the systemic trust with the reference to the person and the community. So this now poses a question on how much a social worker should engage in rebuilding a trust in the welfare system, which is often bureaucratic, where the bureaucracy also show how did not work. So this is a very open question that challenges all of us that I like to pose to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Teresa. So we now come to summarizing the questions. So these are a lot of questions and you may have already got a lot of questions in the chat for us. But I just thought I would quickly run through now the questions that we've posed under each of these headings, ending with an overall question. And I don't know if Jane has the capacity to pop these in the chat on YouTube. It's quite challenging because you can only have 200 characters at a time in the YouTube chat. So she may or may not be able to do that for us, but I know she's very good at this kind of thing. So there was a question about self-care, whether behaving heroically undermines the fight for resources and fairness. The question of what values should guide digital technology going forward. How much social workers should engage with people to rebuild trust in what is a very bureaucratic and maybe outmoded and unfair welfare system. How far current social work education nurtures holistic approaches. Can Ubuntu or similar philosophies guide social work and other professions? What is community that we talk about? And how should social workers prioritize work with communities beyond the pandemic? What is the potential role that social workers can play in co-building this new eco-social world in partnership? Should social workers extend their value commitments from human rights and social justice to include ecological justice, entailing non-human entities have rights too? So all that leads us to the final overall question. The pandemic has caused us to rethink what we value in personal and professional life. And I think that's true of all of us, isn't it? Across the world, it has changed things so much. It's also changed us our thoughts about the relationships between individuals, communities, and the ecosystem. How can social workers and other professionals and the people they work with reinvigorate and refresh their values to take them forward in co-building a new eco-social world? So that's the overall question, and I will stop the screen sharing. I'm hoping that you've seen that for long enough to have made a few notes or had a few ideas about what you in the YouTube group would like to talk about. So I will come out of that and will rejoin the Zoom group. And Hadi, I'm warning you that I'm going to come to Hadi, who is going to give us a few brief reflections on the Arab-speaking world, in particular, drawing on the webinar that you facilitated a few months ago, and your initial reflections, just for 1 or 2 minutes, about those questions that we've raised. Over to you, Hadi.
Yeah, I'll try. I'll try really hard to make it brief. See, we were supposed to be like inviting all the Arab world countries, like speaking Arab languages. But the only country that joined us in the webinar was Saudi Arabia. Even the Gulf countries, what you call Persian Gulf countries or Arab, Gulf countries did not join us. It was only Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So that was one thing. The group that joined us, they were like, I would say the average, they had like 15 years of experience, and some of them had like high degrees of masters and PhD. The majority, they concentrated so much on social responsibility, which was self, others, and the environment, and social justice for all. Like that was the main theme of the webinar, or what we got out of the webinar. It's just back to the question that you raised. It's like it was really difficult. Like people, they're usually under the government's control, especially during the pandemic, and I think we face this in all over the world. And the governments, they were under the World Health Organization control. So governments couldn't do much because they were members of the World Health Organization. So they had to do what they have been told in terms of lockdowns and keeping people safe. And this made people, and maybe in Europe it was more like people they were against the lockdowns and also in terms of the eco or protecting the environment. I think this is also it should be a cultural thing, probably this is in the Christianity too, like spilling blood and killing the sheep, especially in the feasts. And so what I'm trying to say, even protecting non-humans like animals and trees, and sometimes it's a cultural thing, and it's related to politicians and how they think in terms of protecting the environment. I'm trying to be real brief, so.
Thank you. You've
Right.
raised a lot of very interesting points, and points about the differences between different cultures and regions, which I think is a key theme for the summit and for our work. So thank you very much, and I hope you get a chance to say more later. I'm going to move to Hassan now, who convened the Farsi speaking webinar. Would you like to offer some comments, Hassan?
Okay, am I allowed to answer this question on behalf of Hassan? Because I was somehow engaged in almost all part of the session. In the 2 sessions, as you know, Sarah and other colleagues, we had actually 2 sessions. The first one was participating of 3 countries, social workers of 3 Farsi-speaking countries, which were Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. And that was so great for us, so great for Iranian social workers, because that was the first sessions that all, Farsi-speaking social workers were gathering. And the other one was throughout the Asia Pacific region, that may Hassan want to add points of that, or if you have sufficient time. For that session, I mean, Farsi-speaking social workers, I want to say that we had 34 people participating in the session, and we followed the protocol of all the panels like other regions, and that was so interesting, and not only for us but also for other colleagues who all participated in the sessions, because you know, that was a platform that allows our colleagues to talk about many challenging topics that as far as I understood, they didn't have sufficient place to talk about, to pour it out. So that was so good, and they were so thankful to the people who organized it. As other colleagues told in this panel, we have talked about predetermined questions, and we found self-care as the most important things as social worker. Actually, social workers were facing, because you know, we social workers all around the world have always two critical parts. I mean, three critical parts, we could say. First is the social worker perspective. The other one is the clients and service users perspective. And the other one is from the organization perspective. And the social workers during the pandemic had to challenge it so that build a balance between all three perspectives. And because of that, self-care was very important, because many social workers were somehow disappointed. Many of them were personally infected to the coronavirus, and they were actually facing with a deep feeling of fear and inability, especially with a huge amount of patients and dead people, especially again the first year of the pandemic. And the last one was around the education of social work. To make the long story short, which both social workers and students and even professors were concerning about the you know, a revolution of education of social work during the pandemic. Many of them had to be present in schools and in universities without, you know, infrastructures were prepared. Many of them lack access to internet, and the most important one was relating to the field work, which we actually were not prepared to educate our schools without let them arrive in organizations and be physically participating in field work. And still many of them show their remorse that they could not even complete the courses of field work. Yeah, and I know that Hassan will add some points. That was in summary a very short report of the session we had in Farsi-speaking countries. Yeah, Hassan is going to, if you have time, Hassan is going to add some points, and I will translate it in English.
If you could make it very brief, please. Thank you.
یک نکته که به نظر من کرونا نشون داد این بود که آنچه که روی کاغذ نوشته میشه کتاب‌ها هست، در موقعیت بحرانی همیشه قابلیت اجرا نداره.
One thing I want to point out is the content is written in books or the paper, especially in crisis, may not be able to be translated in practice.
تجربه مددکاران اجتماعی و خلاقیت ها میتونه کمک بکنه که خدمات در چارچوب همون اصول ارزش‌ها ارائه بشه.
And the solution is that the social workers use their experiences and the creativity to to overcome the barriers and find a solution for this challenge. And the last point is
داشتن سوپروایزرهای با تجربه و با دانش و مهارت میتونه کمک بکنه که مثلا ترس کمتری برای مواجهه با موضوع.
And in this situation, I believe that applying experience and scientific supervisor can help social workers to to figure out their fears, especially for those social workers who are not very well experienced. And by using supervisor, they can handle their hard situations.
Thank you very much indeed, Abbas and Hassan. And I will in a minute ask Kim to make a comment, but before I do, I'm just going to look at some of the comments that have been summarized for us from the chat, the YouTube participants, noticing that a key theme of the Farsi-speaking webinar was self-care and the issues for social workers and the challenges. I noticed that comments from Uganda that webinars have proved an efficient way to empower frontline workers. So the importance of empowering, enabling other social workers to take action. And in Uganda, the National Association is running national mental health advocacy using webinars, and similar comments from Nigeria. So I'll now pass on to Kim and would ask you to reflect a little bit on those comments, both from the chat and from Hassan and Hadi.
Thank you. One of the themes that came through, I think a promising and constructive theme in the webinars, was the way that the pandemic helped people kind of come together. It broke down some isolation and silos, maybe that we didn't even realize we had as social workers. I recognize the electronic challenges that Maria Jesus talked about that were evident, but I also recall the hope from the webinars that we don't just return to our very busy lives and our very full caseloads and lose that collective action, the support for each other. I think the novel ways that folks provided, social workers provided each other support and consultation, education, that those were all really promising modes of self-care, of collective action. And this is my advocacy that we not lose those. And I think that the importance of the webinars that's been mentioned in the chat kind of supports that.
Thank you for that comment. So I'm looking now in the chat, and a comment coming in relation to Ubuntu, but it doesn't translate well in the European region because the good of the individual is usually considered more important than the good of the collective. Thank you very much for that challenging question. And I've noticed throughout the summit, and some of you will probably have been attending these sessions, there has been questions about are we appropriating in Europe and the global north this concept of Ubuntu, which is actually rooted in a particular culture, time, place, space. So should we be taking that kind of philosophy? Or on the other hand, is it important because Western values have been so dominant for so long that we actually look at philosophies and values from other parts of the world? So I'm giving our panelists here a little bit of time to think. I'm going to go to European, maybe a European philosopher, Maria Jesus, because you are indeed a philosopher at heart, I know that. Do you have any comments about Ubuntu, the philosophy of I am because we are, and what that means in the global north and in Europe in particular? Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think personally, it's my personal opinion, but I think that Ubuntu is a good philosophy, but maybe it's difficult to put this philosophy in practice in Europe, because maybe in Europe we are very individualist, and the philosophy of Ubuntu is a more community philosophy, and it's difficult to just to show that to people and to change the mentalities and the ideas in Europe about that. These days, yesterday, I think that I was listening in one of the feedbacks of one of the webinars in and opinions from Latin America, for example, and they also talk about Ubuntu and about that maybe in Latin America, for example, it was easier than in Europe to put this in practice. I think it's also a cultural thing, and this is difficult to change the cultural and the education of the people. I think we should try to just to show to our kids this philosophy, but from the beginning at the schools, just to try to change this in more individualistic society.
Thank you very much, Maria Jesus. And I see another comment that's come through from Austria. It can be a challenge to make ethics applicable to people who do not know about the concept of Ubuntu. I suppose it can be a challenge to make a community-based solidaristic ethics applicable. I'm wondering maybe, Hadi, if you have any comments on this topic. Do you feel that the idea of Ubuntu, which has been adopted by the International Federation of Social Workers as a key theme and a philosophy moving forward, makes sense in your context, or do you have other philosophies and values that you think are fairly similar about the value and importance of community and solidarity, interconnectedness? If you'd just like to make any brief comments on that, please do so. And if you turn your mic on, that would be good.
Well, I don't have any idea about Ubuntu's, point of view, but I think even in Europe, like I lived in USA for 8 years, and I also, most of my time, I am in Manchester, UK. So I think even in Western world, we should differentiate between the European countries or Western countries. Like in UK, I see more people are more towards communities than being more towards communities than being more like individualistic. In USA, I think it's people like more individualistic than being, more towards communities. And I'm talking like this is like in general. And I think in Arab countries, or let's say more like of Islamic countries, people are like more towards communities than being, thinking about their individual lives. And you could see this even in families, and when in terms of domestic violence, or like when problems occur in families, usually the husband or the wife or the kids or the children, they think of, in terms of more holistic point of view, more than, I want to see my life, I want to find myself, you know what I'm saying? It's thinking of the others, thinking of the surroundings, of the community, of the family. So this is to make it brief. So.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else from the panel like to make a comment on that before we move on?
I just would like to say one word, because one of the things that appears from the webinars is that the pandemic showed the importance of solidarity between people. So how did we connect, and how each of us has overcome the challenges of the pandemic through solidarity. So this could be something that also in Europe and Western countries could be something that social workers value this, and they have used this to create relationship and connection. So maybe this is a good message that we can keep it.
And I also want to add something by viewing from Chinese literature, Confucianism, because in Confucianism there is also a term harmony, and in Chinese it is 和谐. And actually for Chinese, harmony is not about sameness or just acting according to someone's opinion. Actually, it is a little bit complex ideas that we need to reconciling the difference. So it is a process. And Confucianism believes that the formation of new things is a harmonious integration of different or opposite things. And that's why harmony is also the greatest ethics for the Chinese who want to practice to be the sage, and also for them to practice the 5 virtues in Confucian ethics. So because in Chinese, just maybe the last, I don't want to talk so much about Chinese philosophy, but actually this is very traditional, classic in the Chinese culture, that so in order to achieve harmonization, it is a continuous process to adjust difference and also reconcile conflicts, and also to achieve the unity between the heaven and human. Actually, it is very complex, but put it simple, that means how we relate with the others in our day-to-day living. Just like Ubuntu, because Ubuntu also means relationships and bonding with others, because we consider the others and being human through other people. That's why, just as Kim said, that because of the pandemic, we just realized what happened to us in the past that maybe we neglect because we are so individualized. But because of the pandemic, that also make us rethink about our relationship with the others, and also more importantly, with the environment, the climate, whatever else that around us, that we want to achieve balance and also a harmonization, harmonious relationship. Yeah, but just I think that different parts of the world may have different concepts to illustrate the similar ideas, just like maybe in Europe, solidarity, which is also very great human power. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And as ever, as Lynn pointed out,
Sarah, just an order point. I realized that in the translation, she mentioned Confucianism, which is a philosophy, but in the translation, it was confusion. I think it's corrected now. Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's not good for Confucius to be confused with confusion, but perhaps not surprising in these rather complex philosophical discussions. And I was going to say, as Lynn pointed out in her contribution, the importance of community, but yet this question of what is community, and that communities are divided, conflictual, they are as exclusive and divisive and oppressive as they may be inclusive and caring. And that is a challenge, isn't it? For we can't just take on board a simplistic philosophy of working together harmoniously. Sometimes that may also be oppressively. And how do social workers play a role in that at both local and global level? And I think that is a real challenge for us. And I was struck by one of the indigenous speakers earlier in the conference, who talked a lot about, in Peru, fighting for indigenous people's rights. And that was the first fight, the collective rights for indigenous people. The next fight was for women's rights. And she said, we then moved on to individual rights, because for too long, they'd been denying that indigenous men were actually abusing Indigenous women. And so the women needed to campaign for their rights. They're also collective rights as women, but individual rights too. And so that really highlights the huge complexity. And when we add the ecological justice onto that, and I see there's a few comments about that. Linda in the chat has said, if you read the IPCC 2022 report, we must include ecological justice in social work practice. We have compounding hazards with climate change and disaster, which will, for instance, impact migration. Thank you for that comment, Linda. And there's another comment that Jane has summarized from the chat about sustainable development. So I'm going to move on to the sort of ecological sustainable element of this holistic conversation. Talk about the current war and the energy crisis in Europe. But we know that the wars and crises are actually affecting all parts of the world. Now see the most vulnerable are affected by the cost of living, and the ecological disaster becomes the working field for social workers, especially in relation to social justice values. And I think that's a really important point for those of us in Europe who have not been so close to wars. This comes as a wake-up call and a reminder, and social workers are heavily involved. And we've also heard during the summit the stories of the social workers who are in Ukraine, working with the people there, and the solidarity offered particularly from the social work schools in the east of Europe towards the social workers struggling in Ukraine at the moment. So moving to this concept of ecological justice, and this wasn't a concept that was talked about as such in the webinars. So I pulled it out as something that we needed to move towards, and as a concept maybe that some social workers, of course, are committed to and familiar with. As Linda pointed out, this cannot be ignored. But the question is, how ready are we, and how can we incorporate into our fight for human rights the fight for what we see as the rights of the ecosystem, and does that make sense? So how does ecological justice feature in social work practice? How should it? And I will warn Abbas, I'll come to Hassan, I'll come to someone else first, and then we'll come to Hassan in a minute, just to ask about his perspective. So not now, I'll give him time to think through that question of ecological justice and the environment in your context. And so who from the panel would like to comment on that challenging issue, how to take on board ecological justice for a profession that prides itself on social justice?
I'll just ask the question.
So Kim will start, and then I'll move to Hassan.
I will just ask the question, Sarah, for us as social workers, does everybody have to do everything? You know, it's quite a big menu of changes to undertake. I'm back to self-care. So can we make sure that our colleagues who are focused on ecological justice or environmental ethics, environmental justice, feel solidarity, if you will? I mean, so I'm just thinking about all of the things that we as social workers have to take on, and and watching out for burden and if there's room for specialization. So I'll just throw that out as a thought.
That's a really valuable thought, and very, very true and very important, because we can't all do everything. That's partly why we get so stressed, that we're not supposed to be superhuman. Hassan, I wonder if you would like to comment from your perspective on the ecological issues affecting social work.
واقعیت اینه که بخشی از تفاوت‌های در واقع اکولوژی دست مردم نیست.
The fact is that part of ecological differences is not in people's hands.
اما چگونگی بهره برداری از منابع و ظرفیت‌ها، چگونگی حفاظت از محیط زیست با هدف دسترسی برابر برای همه مردم موضوع بسیار مهمی است.
But okay, as I said,
Abbas, we can't hear you very well. I wonder if you could come closer to the microphone.
okay. Is this better?
Yeah, thank you. Oh,
Is this better?
no, it's having an echo now. I'm not quite sure what's happening. Just try one more time, and if it doesn't work, we'll go back to what you were doing before.
Sarah, just I think the translation is bad because I know Farsi, so the translation wasn't good. Because the first point he was making, it was about that the ecological part is not in the people's hands. This is what I understood.
Okay, yes, very important point.
It's in the government's hands, you know.
Right, yeah, yeah. Thank you. And maybe, given your sound is better, Hadi, you might translate if Abbas is finding it difficult. Did you want to add anything more, Hassan, or is that in?
No.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point, and that's something that's come up also in the summit. Hassan, could you turn your microphone off, if you wouldn't mind? Thank you. I think
Sarah, can I add one point in terms of what you raised?
Yes.
Well, see, during the pandemic, like in Kuwait, during the lockdown, the weather, the earth, the water was cleaner in Kuwait, much cleaner. Like usually you see a gray sky because of the oil and because of, the pollution. And I think we need to think or rethink, especially in third world countries, in terms of like having collective transportation, like trains and metros and stuff like that, and the waste that usually goes into the water, and and hunting, hunting animals, and this, I think, etc., should be taken into consideration. Like, what should we as social workers do? Because after the lockdown, things, came back to, what it was in the past. Before the lockdown.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that addition. And so that question of what can we as social workers do is a very valid one. And Hassan quite rightly points out a lot of the problems are exacerbated by governments and big business policies. But one of the themes of the summit, particularly from Kumi, who was an activist who gave a very inspiring opening keynote, is to think, well, actually, the power has to be with the people, and that we, social workers, the people we work with, actually need to take action because big business, powerful government have vested interests, and they are not going to change willingly. So it is down to us. And I see that Joachim is here. If it's the same Joachim as who is the president of the International Federation of Social Workers, I remember Joachim saying in the webinar we had in Africa about the charcoal burning that's taking place in some parts of Zambia, and the role of social workers in looking with people for alternative livelihoods, alternative sources of energy. And this is really important, I think, and we've heard quite a few stories throughout this summit so far of the very creative work that's happening in different parts of the world on looking at sustainable lives and livelihoods. And I think in some parts of the world, social workers have been doing that for a long time. They've had a more community-focused approach. And in other parts of the world where we focus more on individualism, I think we can learn a lot about taking these initiatives. And as Michelle said in her contribution, that old phrase of thinking globally, acting locally, doing those small things, but above all, having a new philosophy, a new vision, the rethinking of our values. Maybe we don't need to change social justice, but we need to rethink how do we put it into practice during an ecological crisis or during a pandemic. Human rights are vital, but in the context of an ecological crisis, what rights do other parts of nature have? And so rethinking our vision probably is very, very important. And I'm noticing that Jane has very ably put some more comments in the chat, comments about education, that social work educators have a great responsibility to guide practice in the future. And a second comment about indigenizing learning can promote the concept of Ubuntu. And Joachim is saying that Ubuntu doesn't just emphasize collectivism, it values dignity and respect for being human. Ubuntu also values life, service, unity, peace and harmony. It promotes solidarity and that works. Thank you very much for that comment. That's a very, very important comment. And I'm only sorry we can't actually have a real dialogue with the audience. It's all via chat, because I think we would benefit from some more detailed philosophical discussion here. But I noticed that we've got just a few minutes left, because we definitely need to finish on time. I would like to ask if there's anybody who would like to make any comments. Lynn, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we haven't drawn you in yet. Was there anything that you would like to reflect on? If you haven't got anything, that's absolutely fine.
Sorry, probably nothing in particular. I've been following the chat as well. It's just what a rich discussion, and how interconnected it is. So the idea of sort of connections with communities. I'm also struck by sort of a renewed sense of a community of social workers as well, and how we learn from one another as a community as well is something that I think is really valuable as well. And I think just looking at some of the discussion points really illustrates that. Yeah.
And I think we've got something else in the chat which comes from IFSW Global. So Mayaka, I think that's you. Thank you, because I know Mayaka has said a lot and written an article, or many articles maybe, about Ubuntu, and again repeating that it's not about the collectivism but the well-being of all humans. So this is what the world needs now, and so that is perhaps a very important point to end on. Some of the messages I'm taking from this group are the importance of listening across cultures, listening to different philosophies, values, ways of living and being, and thinking, how does that challenge our own? We can't necessarily in Europe just simply take Ubuntu and say, this is great, we're going to be good people from now on. We need to locate it within our own context, but we can learn from this valuing of the well-being of all humans, the interconnectivity and the interconnectedness with nature as well, that comes from the indigenous philosophy. So I think that's a key lesson that's coming up throughout the summit, and the importance of translating this for social workers into practice. And
Jane,
no, sorry, Hadi, I'm really sorry,
okay.
but I'm going to be a good person for Mayaka, because we do need to finish on time. So I'm just going to thank you all you panelists, and I'm sorry we could have gone on for an awful lot longer. But I've really valued all your contributions, and above all the contributions from the people joining on YouTube. And let's keep the dialogue going. I think the chat does stay open, so please continue to put comments in the chat, and you can contact us. And Jane, you've said nothing except your short piece, but thank you so much for collating the chat. So now we'll all turn off our mics, turn off our cameras, not speak anymore, and the session will now end.